This has been one of the most dramatic years for the energy industry that I've observed in my entire career. Once again, all of the pundits got it wrong in terms of oil prices. Prices have plummeted. It's had a profound impact on U.S. industry and global industry. And of course, we continue to have an abundance of low-cost natural gas, which has sideswiped the coal industry and the nuclear industry and has even impacted renewables.
I think for me, from a renewables perspective in the energy sector, the major trend is the continued growth in solar deployment globally. There have been some absolutely stunning increases in install capacity. I mean, if you look at China, for example, they've had a 6,000% increase in the amount of solar photovoltaic, that's PV, technology deployed. And there's a growing trend in Latin America. So yes, huge exponential growth.
First of all, on a very positive note, the market should be growing. So we're talking about a market where trends, I think, will be important. We'll see somewhere around 200 gigawatts being added to the grid in the next 15 years. But what's interesting is inside of that, there's roughly 160 gigawatts of power that will basically be retired because of age, primarily coal, and 350 gigawatts or so of new additions, primarily in the form of gas and renewables. So while we have growth, there's also a mix change, which also is going to drive, certain challenges for the market. So, for example, renewables have a high degree of intermittency, and the ability of technologies to work together in order to deal with that intermittency will be critical. I think also of interest in the past, the market was pretty much large central power stations, transmission network to distribution. I think the new market will see maybe 30 to 40% of new additions coming in the form of distributed energy, and that will involve two-way power flows, storage, and other things that will challenge the grid to handle a two-way power flow, which is not necessarily used to doing.
I think it's with the energy sector, the difference is that not very many things happen within a year. It's there are much longer processes that are happening, and you actually can see the outcome of certain developments not really quickly, but also then they drive the developments for the future also for numerous years. I think that one of the most important trends recently is are all sort of new players on the market in the energy business that have nothing to do with the regular utility type of companies, especially as far as the financing side is concerned. The utilities got much sort of weakened over the last 10 years due to various regulatory requirements, and that opens the door for the, I'd say, more independent players that are looking for the business opportunities and are considering the energy business as any other type of business.
I think a big trend that we're seeing in the energy sector is we're at a bit of a tipping point with energy storage. We are really starting to see consumers being very interested in having energy storage on their homes. We're seeing utilities starting to push the development of storage capability at the utility scale in a way they haven't before. So I think that's going to be one of the big drivers that really changes the way the energy sector is functioning in the U.S.
Well, where to start with major trends in the energy sector? Just about everything is changing. Right now we have a continued focus on carbon reductions in the sector, and how to achieve that is really the focal point. Continued recognition that renewables are going to play an increasing and important role, but the issue of intermittency, the fact that we can't count on renewables to meet customer demand when we have peak hours of demand, has come to the forefront as we saw some of the crises in the polar vortex. So storage, very clearly is something that, as it gets paired up with renewables, is going to try to solve the riddle of whether we could get carbon-free electricity on a guaranteed 24/7 basis when our customers need it.
I think we will see a lot of investment in technology developments, and largely because of the oil prices having seen the bottom drop out, to ensure that other energy sources become viable and remain viable. We're going to see an upsurge in technology investment. Now, of course, the challenge with that is that in certain quarters in the world, you would have technology innovation, which is substantially cheaper than technology development. So I see that as a major trend. Lots more energy technology companies. I think the development of smart grids, the increasing development of smart grids, and of course, the Internet of Things, and the impact of that and the requirement for energy, the relationship between energy development, energy generation, and how it connects with the Internet of Things. I don't think that relationship is yet developed, but that's a trend certainly in terms of people thinking around that.
Well, I think you've had a dramatic cycle of change. You went from scarcity to the explosion of fracking, which looked at one point like it was going to just swamp the world with resources. Then you had a very strong dollar and a weak economy around the world, and suddenly you had a collapse of the price of oil, so that it makes it less economically viable to have a fracking-dominated strategy. You have, I think, a growing awareness that our electric grid faces very severe threats, cyber attack, electromagnetic pulse, as well as some of the recent examples near San Francisco of physically attacking the system. So I think you're going to see a real effort to focusing on that. And people have to take into account that if Iran does come back into the world market, the additional Iranian production in a weak worldwide economy at a time when you have a strong dollar, you could see oil driven down into the $40, $45 range in a way that plays havoc with people who are counting on $70, $80, $90, or $100 a barrel oil. So I think all those different factors are in play. The last thing I'd say is nobody should underestimate the potential breakthrough that Tesla with the gigafactory is developing. I mean, if you actually get to viable, relatively inexpensive batteries, you do lots of things to change the options for people.
A new interesting development in the energy is going to be the agreement with Iran and how that's going to impact the global markets. So I think there's a lot of discussion at the moment. When they come online in probably 8 or 9 months is what they are expecting, and what that additional capacity is going to do with the prices, which globally there's already a lot of pressure on prices, as everyone knows.
The energy sector is really still being driven by low natural gas prices. It's affecting virtually every other section of the electricity sector. It's obviously undercutting coal, undercutting and preventing more or less the construction of new nuclear plants, and it's even beginning to pressure renewables, and will do so more so as some of the tax incentives and tax breaks for renewables roll off in the years ahead. So that is really the fundamental driver for what is happening in the electricity sector. And in the oil sector, we're obviously seeing, again, a lot of supply, but underneath very, very weak demand. And I tend to see the demand issue as one that is perhaps not recognized as readily by a lot of the analysts, but as you look forward and you see rising efficiency requirements for new gasoline-powered cars, you're seeing introduction of new biofuels, more and more biofuels, which will replace oil. And you are seeing, of course, over the horizon, there are going to be moderately priced electric vehicles, which will, I think, begin to really bite into that demand for the oil industry, especially as the electric utilities realize the market opportunity and start really building out the charging infrastructure needed to support electric vehicles. But that's, I think, low demand and the electrification of the vehicle industry, and also hydrogen-powered cars. But I'm not sure people are recognizing the impact of that in the years ahead.
Well, there's so many different trends that one could pick out in the energy industry on a global basis. I mean, the most obvious ones are the import of the shale plays in the United States. Obviously, you can't separate the U.S. Sort of independence in oil and gas from the geopolitical events, where it may be the potential deal with Iran, or Russia's resurgence of influence throughout Europe, or the fact that the Gulf states continue to try to up production so they can hang on to market share. You overarching factors with the economies of China potentially slowing down, and the rise in India not being quite as significant, at least in the short term, from an economic scale. So there's just so many factors. If anyone tries to single out one factor in the energy business, I'm not sure that's possible. It's sort of, it's like the old Eagles song, right? Life in the fast lane is everything all the time. And that's unfortunately the energy business, and trying to be able to go through that and isolate a particular issue and say that's the issue in the energy business, I think is virtually impossible.